Good afternoon to you all. Good afternoon to you all. I'm very happy to be here with you this evening, morning, afternoon, depending on what time zone you're on. My name is Sarawat. I am a pedagogical team lead at the Digital Learning Lab at Mohammed VI Polytechnic University. I'm very extremely proud to be within this beautiful group of vice chancellors, ministers, preeminence in e-learning and edtech technology, and to have the opportunity to represent EM6B. We're extremely proud to be hosting the event, and this solidifies the strong partnerships that we have with Rufero. And I just wanted to come back to something that Dora said earlier. You, Mr. Professor Adepala, are really a great person, and I confirm you do make everybody feels so special. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to host this this panel and to moderate, sorry, this panel. And to thank Dora for a great first session. So just as a reminder of today's theme, today we are discussing the realignment towards online teaching and learning in universities and trying to learn from each other's course and from each other's experiences. If you'll allow me, I'll just describe the outline of this second session. So we are starting a 2-hour and 20-minute session, so bear with us. This session is about advances and opportunities for integration of digital technologies in university education systems. We will start with a short introduction to the subject, and then we'll open the floor for a great set of panelists that we have today. We have with us our lead speaker, who is Professor Francis Peterson, who is a Vice Chancellor and Principal at the University of Free State in South Africa. Our first panelist is Dr. Tony Frank, who's Chancellor of the CSU, Colorado State University in the USA. Our second panelist is Professor Arturo Kondo, who is Rector at Earth University in Costa Rica. Our third panelist is Dr. Thandi Mgwibi, who is Deputy Vice Chancellor at Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. And our fourth speaker is Professor Teresa Akenji, who is Vice Chancellor at the University of Bamenda in Cameroon. Thank you all for honoring us and being with us today. I just wanted to introduce you all before we kickstart the panel. And our rapporteur for today is Dr. Alice Muita, who is Deputy Executive Secretary at RU Forum. So after our 1 hour and 15 minutes session and speaking session, presenting sessions by our speakers and panelists, we will move to about 40 minutes Q&A session, in which we highly recommend and ask you to participate and share your experiences on the subject. And if time allows, we have programmed a 15 minutes conclusion from our speakers, myself, and Dr. Alice, our rapporteur. And finally, we will close by our permanent host, our RU Forum Executive Secretary, Dr. Adipala, who, again, indeed, makes us feel very special. So thank you for all being here today. I'll ask you to kindly mute your microphones and the computer and device if you're not speaking. Interpretation is available in French and Arabic, and we highly advise you to and recommend that you participate and use the chat room to ask any questions or chat with our support team. So without further ado, let's start with our introduction. So we had a very interesting first session in which we've discussed policies and institutional framework for integrating digital technologies and universities in educational system at university level. And in this session, we will discuss the advances and opportunities. So advances and amazing efforts that have been made by yourselves during this pandemic, before and after the pandemic, either by the African continent or internationally. And we'll have the immense pleasure to actually hear you and read you share your experiences on this. And then we will explore the opportunities at hand. Dora mentioned a very important thing before, twice actually in the first session, is that the main intake from this is to learn from each other, but mainly and eventually build collaborations and partnerships and avenues of and opportunities of collaboration, so that we build an even stronger network. So digital technology, we will be discovering the digital technology landscape in universities in Africa and internationally. We will hear from you on the advances made in integrating online learning and teaching at university level. And then we will be tackling some issues related to inclusivity in online learning, how development of online contents have been made at your respective institutions, how retooling of students happened, and we will be seeing how we can explore avenues of collaboration between the different stakeholders and the different people present here. I'm right on time to actually start. I consumed my 10 minutes, and I will humbly welcome our lead speaker today, who is Professor Francis Peterson. Professor Francis Peterson is the Rector and Vice Chancellor of the University of the Free State in South Africa. He was Deputy Vice Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, Dean of Engineering and the Built Environment at the University of Cape Town, and Executive Head Strategy at Anglo-American Platinum. He was also Executive Vice President Research and Development at Mintech and Head of the Department of Chemical Engineering at the Cape Technicon. He's a non-executive director on the boards of Fruits Unlimited, Begin Africa, and Stone 3 Digital, and several others. It is an honor, an immense pleasure to have you here with us, sir. And Professor Peterson will be talking to us about the digital technology landscape in universities in Africa, and will be exploring with us different advances and opportunities of integration of digital technologies in service delivery, especially in university education system. So if you can hear us, Dr. Francis Peterson, it is again an honor to have you. You have, we kindly ask you to present to us in a 15 minutes time span all the advances that have been made by your institution.
All right, thank you very much, Sarah. And if you can just give me indication whether you could see my screen.
We can perfectly see it, sir.
All right. So, first of all, thank again, Sarah, and also thank you very much to RUForum for inviting me to talk to this specific session with the focus of realignment towards online teaching and learning, but much more focusing on the digital technology landscape. So I'm going to move to the first slide, and what I'm trying to say here is that although universities on the African continent have been involved in blended methodologies, which in fact involve technology, in the previous session, we did talk about I would say the disparity or the distribution of these sorts of blended technologies across universities on the continent. So not all the universities have been equally resourced or are equally resourced to be able to apply these methodologies effectively. So, but nevertheless, there are universities and a whole range of universities that are involved with these blended methodologies. And what COVID-19 really has done was to accelerate the focus on digitization. Uh, um, and although the focus here is the teaching and learning, I would like to say it's not only in teaching and learning, very much so in teaching and learning, because that has been the debate, but it's also focused on other aspects of the university business model. But before I'm going to get to the other aspects and how the digital technology landscape look like, I do think it's important to spend probably one or two slides and not too much time on teaching and learning. And the point that I want to bring across here to the audience is that although the focus is on online teaching and learning, we must never forget what is the purpose of learning. And the purpose of learning, the way that I have articulated it here, that is actually the fundamental level of human life, and that should be to be understood. That there's a relationality, and in fact that relationality is enmeshed with what goes on around the individual, what goes on with it, and what goes through it. And that is that relationship, that engagement is quite important when we're looking at learning. And we must always keep that at the back of our minds. In fact, that should be the center of our minds, because digital tools are meant to facilitate the process of enabling and encourage that complex relationship with each individual student and their life. And we mustn't that the online learning taking the center stage, that we forget about what in fact is the purpose of learning itself. And therefore, the flexibility of that is for me quite important. Now, if you look at the COVID-19 pandemic, I did already say that it in fact brought the focus on digital tools. But again, I want to emphasize that it also have created a unique opportunity to understand our students better. Uh, um, I think there's much more individual engagement between the academic, the lecturing staff, and individual students. And that engagement is hopefully something that we should also take forward post COVID-19 or into what I would call a new normal, so to speak. So the student experience, the student understanding, what our students are all about should be at the center of our institutional design and should also be at the center when we engage with online teaching and learning. So if we, and we are all in higher education institutions, all that we do should be based on facts, it should be based on evidence. So in our institution and in the broader South African region, there had been various institutional surveys, and there has been a South African a survey on students' access to and the use of learning materials. Try to understand what are the particular issues and things that are the sort of the key stumbling blocks or challenges towards online learning or remote teaching and learning. And the three that wasn't surprised that came out was digital devices or devices itself, data, the access to data, and then also network connectivity, whether there are connectivity or whether there are electricity challenges. But those were the three things that came out in these consolidated surveys. And that actually have forced and let academics reflect on how they can develop new interventions, but also how they can adapt existing support to staff and students that is most suited towards an emergency remote teaching and learning environment. So the first slide, moderator, a couple of slides, was just to focus on to say that just remember what teaching and learning is all about. It's not necessarily only about the digital skills. It's just all about the student understanding, student experience, and putting the student at the center of that design. So if we move to, but how does the digital landscape therefore look like on the African continent? Digital infrastructure and data remain a major challenge on the continent. And COVID-19 have just demonstrated that again. The whole issue of digital inequality. Although my first slide indicated that most universities on the African continent is involved with methodologies that involve digital tools in one way or another, there is still this divide. And the question is, how would one solve that? How would one go about to to challenge that? And I do believe that there isn't one specific grouping, individual, or entity that can resolve it. It can't only be government. So we need to look at governments across the continent. We need to look at universities as a collective, whether we look at it in different regions. RU Forum, I do believe, has a role to play, but so the other university associations. We need to talk to telecommunication companies. We need to talk to philanthropic organizations. If you look at philanthropic organizations, I think they have also focus their strategies post-COVID differently. And the challenge of how to make an impact, they call it in their terminology, ruthless impacts, that could fall within the value proposition. But I do think that we need to find a way of bringing these actors together and not only talking about it, get them together, We know exactly what need to be done. We need to take what need to be done and put it into an implementable plan. And that can only be done if we bring all of these around the table. So that is a challenge, something that we could unpack in the Q&A again, but that is something that I feel really strong about. The second part is what does COVID-19 also demonstrated, and the digital platforms that are available to our students. They also highlighted a couple of challenges amongst our students itself. The appropriate uh, ability, the competency with respect to digital skills. Not all of our students do have that. And for that matter, probably not all of our staff have got it. And therefore, we need to have more if we're looking at redesigning curricula specifically for first years that comes in, if we're looking at orientation of staff, those are things that we need to focus on. Time management. Students were now on their own and they often couldn't organize or do that effectively. And then also communication skills. Now that the communication is drilled down to the individual student, to the individual lecturer, we then can, we could have seen some cracks in the communication skills. But they weren't only negatives, they were also positives. We also have seen that students have become more independent. They think for themselves, and they also became more self-reliant. And those are two things that I think as a sector we need to think more about. We need to say, well, how can we develop that even further and bring it into the way in which we engage with our students at the universities? What the online environment also have presented was to pivot the online and digital tools from not only teaching and learning, but to also the services and the support towards your academic project. So we now have e-academic advice, which we could do on e-platforms, which we can do electronically, which we can do telephonically. We have e-tutorials that is now being used. Lecture capturing, tutorials capturing, they can go back and study it on their own pace. The whole issue of student well-being has been a major issue. To what extent does online mental health, and a lot of universities have engaged in that. Now we also have online modules to enhance graduate employability. Our graduates need to go up, whether it's entrepreneurship or whether they're going to work into the formal sector of the economy. To what extent do you promote graduate employability? And we do have companies like Coursera and others that are now refining their online modules towards also looking at graduate employability. The integration of digital technology in other parts of the university, applications has become now as a standard, so to speak, online application, online registrations that you can do, and therefore you don't have a lot of people that group together at the registration desks. We all have, most of our universities have learning management systems. And to what extent do we use data analytics, integrate that with other sectors of your teaching and learning, or your research, and also your planning to make your university much more effective. So COVID-19 has given us power, and data is in fact that power, that tool that is important. Some universities have gone to virtual meetings, virtual graduation ceremonies. We now also have flexible HR modules where staff could work from home, those categories of staff that can work from home. Our whole understanding of internationalization, where a lot of our internationalization has been built on mobility. That model is in fact turned on its head. And it's not only thinking from the African continent, it's also different thinking now in internationalization from the UK, from North America, from Europe and other parts of the globe. And to a certain extent, that digital technologies have reshaped that parts of the business. So, Madam Moderator, in conclusion, I would like to say that, and I want to use this part of this phrase as a way of figuratively speaking. is to say, whereas we have been focusing up until now on digitization in part, mainly on online learning, we now have to move to digitization at heart. To what extent becomes that part of the DNA of the university? And I've cited some examples. The second point is, although digital infrastructure in the African continent is fragmented, there are universities of the continent who have adopted already such an integrated approach of using digital technologies and the full business model. The important thing of that point is that we need to create the platform and the ability to share those with our other colleagues and amongst ourselves on the continent, and create the platform and the mechanisms to support us in the different strategies so that we act as the collective. And that is what I believe will take us forward and will improve tremendously the digital landscape on the African continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for tackling all the points mentioned and for making it extremely brief and to the point. And again, I would like to thank you for reminding us of the purpose of learning and teaching. Students' experience is indeed should be at the center of all the learning and the instructional design that is done. A question that we might discuss later on is, what about the professors' experience? We can talk about that during the Q&A section. And as you mentioned before, governments, philanthropists, and philanthropist institutions and associations could play a big role in supporting education at universities. So it will be interesting to unpack that in a Q&A section as well. Again, you mentioned that the services that are placed to support not only students learning, but also their learning experience as support system. And you've eloquently spoken about data and the importance of data outside and inside of this crisis, which we could use collectively, again, as a network to improve the learning experiences and to tackle all the issues that may face us. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Pearson, for your intervention. Without further ado, we'll move to our second speaker, which is our first panel speaker, Dr. Tony Frank. Dr. Tony Frank, you are Chancellor of and former President of CSU, Colorado State University. You serve on a number of state and national boards, including the University Research Alliance, National Renewable Energy Laboratory as an external advisory council, and the external advisory council, and many other boards. Prior to your appointment at CSU's as CSU's president, you served at the university's provost and executive vice president for research, chairman of the pathology department, and associate dean for research in the College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences. You have earned a bachelor's degree in biology from Warburg College, followed by a doctorate of veterinary medicine degree from the University of Illinois, and a PhD and residence in pathology and toxicology at Purdue. We are very honored to have you within this panel today, Professor. I will kindly ask you to answer in 15 minutes time span what have been some of the experiences that have been led at USA level and at CSU in particular in terms of integrating online teachings and learnings. What institutional framework do you think should be put in place in order to foster integration and of online teaching and learning at university level? How has your university dealt with issues like inclusivity in online learning, which is a big question, obviously? And what opportunities do you see possible for partnerships with African university? Thank you so much, Professor. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Sarah, and good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for including me on this panel. The topics that we're dealing with here today are important for all of higher education globally, with both immediate and long-term impacts. Before I turn my attention to my comments, I want to echo a comment from Dr. Peterson that I think it's incredibly important that we always try and maintain our focus on our students. That's always the case, but particularly in these times where they're challenged with continuing their studies in the face of the pandemic. I think that focus on students really serves us and them well. So for just a bit of context for all of you, Colorado State University is what in America we would term a land-grant university, meaning that in addition to conducting research and teaching in areas related to agriculture and veterinary medicine, we were born back in 1862 out of a responsibility to provide educational access to children of the working class. Now, 150 years later, that role and mission looks different. But access to education and the importance of helping to feed our world in a sustainable manner are still at the core of what land-grant universities in America are all about. Our university system is composed of 3 separate universities. Our main campus is just at 35,000 students. It's a very productive research university. This campus for a long time has participated in what we would have originally called distance learning. Started out with mailing materials via post, switched to television and videotapes, and now there's online delivery, primarily synchronous, but some asynchronous, that is increasingly used by face-to-face students as a choice, where they pair with their traditional face-to-face classes. And obviously, last March, those online opportunities expanded dramatically in the face of the pandemic. Our second campus is in the town of Pueblo, Colorado. It's home to about 4,000 students in the southern part of our state. The majority of these students are ethnically diverse. Many come from economically disadvantaged areas. Online options here prior to the pandemic were much more limited. And our third campus is Colorado State University Global Campus. It was created a little over a decade ago as a fully online university. It has about 20,000 students. It works in 8-week blocks rather than semesters, uses mastery learning rather than the lecture per se. And while younger students are now starting to attend Global Campus immediately after they finish high school, it was originally designed around providing education to working adults. So across these 3 campuses, we have roughly 60,000 students that come to us from all backgrounds and all walks of life. But really importantly to us, about a third of those students are what we would call first-generation students, meaning neither of their parents has attended college. In America, first-generation students tend to be more ethnically diverse. They tend to come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, and their success rate at the university tends to be lower than their affluent peers, where one or both parents had a college education. But at our campuses, we've developed support mechanisms such that we have low single-digit differences in success rates between these students and non-first generation students. And we're proud of that success. There's more work to be done, but we're proud of where we're at. All of that success was challenged by the pandemic. Like most American universities, in March of 2020, in the midst of our semester, we were forced to suspend face-to-face instruction and shift virtually overnight to delivering campuses online. CSU Global Campus didn't miss a beat. They were already doing that. Our main campus that had strong online programs was able to shift actually more effectively than I would have guessed. They had some problems, but there were more successes than problems, and they had a lot to learn from as we entered blended learning environments when we came back to school this fall. Our Pueblo campus had the most difficulty. They didn't have an online platform to fall back on, but with the help of colleagues from our other 2 institutions, they made the pivot as well. And they finished both last semester and now this semester in a successful manner. So because we're all educators and researchers, we ask the obvious question, what do we learn from these experiences? What can we share with each other? So I think our online experiences largely mirror your own. Indeed, Professor Tawana-Kupe's excellent article from November 5th in the University World News captures much of what I'd share with anyone on this subject. But I will say that the decade of online learning at CSU Global Campus in particular, as well as the emergency experiment that we conducted at our other 2 campuses of taking 40,000 students online overnight in the middle of a semester, have taught us some things. And as I think through those, there are four that I would choose to share with you. First, face-to-face education is still valued by our students on our two traditional campuses. There were all sorts of dire predictions about the end of traditional universities once students started experiencing online education. That hasn't materialized for us. Our students really wanted to come back to campus. They were willing to undergo all manner of inconveniences in order to still experience some level of face-to-face instruction. And I think we'll see that continue. But at the same time, as these students do take more lectures online, I think we're going to open the door to using our most precious asset, time, differently. If we no longer have to gather students in a block at the same point in time to listen to a lecture, then it begs the question of what we can do with that time. If students are presented with the facts before we come together, can we make the transition to working on higher order learning skills? How to work effectively as teams, how to gather data, how to communicate, how to work across cultural boundaries. There are a lot of important issues that I think we're going to find open up to us once we're freed up from the time of delivering the lecture as the method of transmission. Second point I'd make, online education has been very difficult on working adults. A lot of them have children who are now at home because the schools have closed. Many of them have lost a job where the employer paid their educational costs. And so while online education we would have thought opened all of these opportunities, it's actually been a challenge for working adults to continue to access education the way they did before the pandemic. Third point, online education has its own issues around inclusivity. CSU's global campus has very active, very robust systems in place to develop a faculty mindset around access, flexibility, equity, and transparency. They've got these very active database systems for monitoring student, faculty, and student-student interactions. But none of that inclusivity crossed the digital divide, the difference in electronic access between wealthier urban areas and poorer areas, whether they were in urban or rural settings. This divide, at least in America and in Colorado, has been dramatically exposed by the pandemic. In many parts of rural Colorado, we simply don't have the bandwidth to properly connect for online education, let alone the telemedicine that we're prepared to offer these communities and that they want and need. Access to laptops is another issue that you've heard previous panelists talk about. I think this issue of the equipment and the access and the digital divide really needs to be an international focus, a focus for all of us if online education is to be truly inclusive in the access that it promises to provide. And the fourth point I'd make is that I think there's a big change in how we think about connecting with each other over time and distance. And I think that has dramatic implications for joint research projects in graduate education. For some years, we've been working in the so-called sandwich PhD programs with partner universities in Mexico primarily. Students begin their studies at their home university. They come to our campus to conduct their thesis research, return home to complete their thesis work. Some of these programs are dual badged, jointly granted. It's a great way for our partner universities. Some of them have felt to grow their own faculty, great research opportunities for our faculty members and researchers. The projects actually started when a colleague of mine is a member of the National Academy of Sciences was working in the Yucatan on West Nile virus and dengue fever. And since that time, we've had wonderful partnerships with the University Autónoma de Yucatan. But what I see happening now is different. More and more of our faculty are fundamentally asking, why can't this research be conducted somewhere else? Why does it have to be done here at our institution? If we can use online connectivity to connect the advisor and the student across distance, what about a truly global graduate committee? And this change in mindset, I think, has really important implications for shared research efforts beyond graduate education. In fact, our work at Colorado State with the International Livestock Research Institute in Nairobi, which was very strong several decades ago, has been reinvigorated recently around research on African swine fever. And those opportunities spun off into components of COVID-19 vaccinology and have engaged important private sector partners. Now, almost all of that was done recently. and via online connections, something we would have been very skeptical we could do a year ago. So I believe what we've seen in terms of these successes and the subtle but critical change in mindset to what can be done online will open a large number of opportunities as we move ahead. Indeed, I think the opportunities for progress around online connected research may be every bit as important as the lessons we're learning in online teaching and learning. And both open the doors to important international collaboration opportunities. And here, I think our experience at CSU Global Campus offers some important lessons, and I'd share 3 of those with you. First, pick your partners carefully. Avoid partners that focus on the difficulty, why something can't be done, or why it will be really hard to get done. Find partners who are willing to experiment and to stretch their own bureaucratic systems in order to see if success is possible. Second point, on the other end of that spectrum, personally, I'd be wary of partners who believe that online will replace everything traditional. I'm not sure that fully online, no face-to-face, will meet the needs of a certain percentage of our students in the post-pandemic world. I think we're still going to see a lot of students who want the face-to-face interactions. And I believe in those settings, there will still be abundant new opportunities that will be unlocked for blended approaches, including additions of online connectivity. And third, I would suggest that we all need to keep our focus on what our constituents need. Reforum's recent ICT gap analysis is an important document in this regard. Look for partners who want to create a win-win situation, who recognize that your needs must be met as well as theirs. Partnerships based on those 3 principles, people who think something can be done, people who see the balance of all these activities, and people who want win-win situations. Those are institutions where we've found great success in partnerships. And I think those partnership opportunities will be abundant. I'd close with this summary. Despite having worked in online education in different formats for over 3 decades, intensively over the last decade at our CSU Global Campus, the dramatic need to go face-to-face, fully online in the face of the pandemic caught us underprepared. But we all adapted. And all of us have learned from those adaptations. And we can stand here today seeing some amazing new opportunities for partnerships, access, and the promise of educational equity that we could not see nearly this clearly prior to the pandemic. But we also know our weaknesses. We know we have to improve digital access to attain the promise of online educational equity. And as we address those weaknesses, as we pursue those opportunities, we will, as we always have, draw on the lessons, both the successes and the failures of our previous partnerships. I'm an optimist, but I would love to be here 20 years from now and see the fruit that we're harvesting from the seeds that are being sown in the wake of this great educational disruption. And every single one of us is a part of that great experiment. So I'll close by saying thank you for inviting me to comment and to listen to your experiences and learn from them. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your optimism and for inspiring us, Professor. And again, thank you for sharing the diversity of methods that you have for teaching and learning. It's truly impressive to also hear the mechanisms that you've put in place to support your students and your melting pot of students clearly. An interesting point that you mentioned and that I'm very personally happy about is how researchers and professors are now eager to go more and more online. I think COVID, in a very unfortunate manner, has fortunately allowed us to truly be global citizens and to speed the digitization process. And I'm sure the audience will have a lot of questions and a lot of comments on your experience in the Q&A section. We still have about 3 minutes on your intervention. Do you think you can speak to us about the institutional frameworks that were put in place either by the government or the different institutions in the USA to actually face the pandemic?
Sure. If I'm candid, I would say that we didn't get a lot of federal government support in putting up frameworks to help us deal with the educational impacts of the pandemic. There were blocks of funds released by the federal government early on. The majority of those funds went directly to students to help them and their families, and that's something we support. We always want to support our students, but the majority of the fiscal impact of these changes fell on the universities themselves, and our federal government did not particularly step up in robust ways to support that. They provided some assistance. We're grateful for that, but I think there was some leadership lacking in that regard. After that, in the United States, a lot of the educational funding falls to the states. And as anyone who's been watching recent politics in America knows, we're a relatively divided and polarized society right now. So you had states that made very robust investments in their educational support systems, and you had states that did very little. In Colorado, we were fairly fortunate. We had a governor who stepped up and really provided a lot of increased funding and provided a lot of attention to how to support the universities and their students. But at the end of the day, the frameworks that really mattered were developed at the institutions. And those institutions, and again, I'll go back to Dr. Peterson's comment and his reminder to us to stay focused on our students. Those institutions who looked at the situation and went, well, we know we had a lot of plans for this semester, and we know that all of those plans are now disrupted. But the most important thing are the young men and the young women who were sitting in those chairs that are empty now and are entrusting to us their future, their time, their talent, their resources. How do we give them what they need to take advantage of those skills and talents, to hone them and help make a difference in our world? The places that kept that at the center of their priority list, I think did very well. Is that responsive to your question?
It does. Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you. It was a pleasure having you. We're right on time, actually. And so without further ado, we'll move to our second panel speaker, who is Professor Arturo Condo, who's rector at Earth University in Costa Rica. So Professor Condo is Professor of Strategy and Competitiveness. He serves as a Senior Institute Associate of Harvard's Institute for Strategy and Competitiveness, which is a think tank. He is the former president of the INCAE, a leading business school and think tank in Latin America. Prior to that, he was the Dean of the MBA, Dean of Innovation and Development, and Director of the Latin American Center for Competitiveness and Sustainable Development. Professor Condo has a doctorate from Harvard Business School in Business Strategy and Competitiveness and was recognized as a distinguished scholar in his MBA. Professor Arturo, it is a pleasure to have you with us here in this panel. I'll kindly ask you in 15 minutes to speak to us about Latin America's experience and Earth University in particular's experience in terms of integrating online teachings and learnings. Again, how has your university tackled issues of inclusivity and content creation outside and inside of this crisis? And what possibilities of collaboration and joint creation and sharing of educational resources do you see possible with African institutions?
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that introduction, and it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. In particular, thanks to Professor Ari Pala, who's an old and dear friend of our university. Let me say a couple of words about Earth. I think Earth University, I think it's a great contrast actually to Colorado State University in terms of size, in terms of history. We're very young. In that, it can be very useful, right, to compare and contrast. In that sense, we are focused on agricultural sciences and rural development in general. So we include things like sustainable energy in our program because it's part of what the future of rural development requires. We're small. All of our students live on campus, and all this is relevant for tackling the questions around online learning and how we have transitioned. We're also very young, which is also it's a good thing in that it's easier to change when you're relatively young. When you're setting your ways, it's always harder as a human being or as an organization. So that has, I think, has helped. And we're very hands-on, which is also interesting because before the pandemic, classroom time was maybe 25% of the program. And so when we transitioned to digital, I'll share with you in a second. So I'm putting a context of a very particular experiment that we have been, and I love Dr. Frank's take on it. This is a global experiment that we should for sure learn from. I mean, this is a great opportunity. I share his optimism on the opportunities. I do think it is on us to take that opportunity and make it into something. It will require investment. So as a Latin American perspective, let me say this: we in Latin America have done some online, but very little. There are, Monterrey Tech, a big university in Mexico. I would say probably the most important university in Mexico, a very important university in Latin America, I think has made the most inroads in this and have done tons for 20, 25 years and follows Dr. Frank's kind of progression, right? I mean, from videos to even them were not fully prepared for this, let alone those who, like us, were, again, 75% hands-on experience in the field, in labs, and losing that for us was seen as potentially devastating. Hasn't been though, and I think one thing that I can definitely attest for our faculty that I was proud of before, but I'll tell you that after these 8 months, I cannot be prouder, to be honest, because a friend of mine, he's the president of a technological university in the US. He was sharing with the group, that if somebody had asked him to go full digital, full virtual, and what would that have required, he would have said $1 billion in 5 years. And they did it in a week without a penny, right? I mean, everyone did what they had to do with very little resources. We all invested, yes, but it had to be done in a matter of weeks. And I think we're learning from it for sure. Let me share our transition, because I think it's an interesting experiment to think about this learning. And I completely agree with Professor Peterson and Professor Frank in terms of this is about learning. And I think, maybe one of the good things about the COVID crisis has been that focus. I mean, we have more than before, I feel, are focusing on the student, as we always should have been. And so at Earth, definitely we think of learning, not of teaching so much, or we see teaching as facilitating the facilitation of learning on the part of students. And in our case, moving to digital in March was an amazing feat. And we've gone through, I would say, 3 stages in our case, but that could be interesting to think, as a progression or as a case study for the progression in moving the world towards something that has virtual at its heart, but that is not necessarily for virtual, at least not for everyone. And I'll talk about that in a second. So the first stage was we went all digital, right? And in doing that, we lost a lot of the practical stuff. Now, all of our students live on campus. And so what we did is we went into a lockdown. We're in Costa Rica. We've had 2 waves of the COVID virus, of COVID infections in Costa Rica. The one was super small. For the first 3 months, we had very few cases. The second has been much larger, actually more in line with other places in the world, but higher than most, where I would say in the top 25% in cases per million, not in deaths, thanks to we don't know what. That's another discussion. But the thing is, we went into lockdown as an university. And so our students were small, but our students have been pretty much in a bubble. And that has allowed us since June to go back to in-person experiences. Not the classrooms, because again, that was only 25% of the program. And so that has remained virtual. But the practical part has been we were able to recover that. So the first was all digital. And of course, what you can digitalize or make virtual is easier is classroom work, right? Lectures, or and that was done. But it was interesting because even in that first stage, several professors without previous training, out of their own creativity, of course, the passion for learning, and they started kind of digitalizing some experiential work. For instance, Dr. Frank is in animal science, right? And so, for instance, practices on insemination, which students would do personally, they couldn't do at the very beginning, but the professors would, record things, explain things, and so it would go beyond the classroom, and some practical experiences were digitalized. It's not the same, but it was something, and it was interesting to see, the efforts to make it in an all digital world, to bring some of the practical experience. When we went back to the fields and the labs, and it was, of course, that was easier. That was we recovered that. We kept the classroom instruction virtual. But as we have now moving into a third stage, which is really putting some virtual back into the practice. So it's like I compare it to a flight simulation, right? There is nothing that can substitute a pilot experience, flying a plane. But simulators are very useful, right? I mean, if you crash, a simulator is less costly than actually crashing a plane. So having some simulation hours actually is a great thing before you fly an actual plane, but it doesn't replace it. And so we are now exploring that. And I think that progression in our case can also be a parallel to a more global progression of including virtual. In our case, we have students from all over Latin America, the Caribbean, and Africa. So the in-person experience is critical, because the learning from other cultures, from other languages, even from other backgrounds, from other realities, is a part of what the Earth experience is meant to be. And that can be done virtually, yes, to some extent, but living together, of course, brings another dimension to it. So we do not, we do not see a world in which we have only virtual. This part cannot be substituted, at least for now, in a perfect way. But we do see a potential mix for something different, right? And so, for instance, on that part, one thing we have done, and we could have done before, and also refer to that later, because the technology we're using since March or since February this year was there in December last year, but we were not using it as we are today in the world, and of course, and for sure here at Earth University. But we have now brought speakers, and not only speakers on specific technical things around agriculture, animal science, food science, or other things, but on other issues, on African issues, on global issues, and political issues, and that was always there. Again, we were not doing it. Now we're doing it more intensely, and it will be part in our case for sure of the future of our program. So that's number one. That has been our progression, but I think again provides kind of a case study or a point, a data point in this global experiment that we're running. We in terms of inclusivity in our particular case, we don't have the challenge because we have all students here. But we are exploring though, and one thing that I will say is two things. One, in the previous panel was discussed, is access, and for sure that's a major thing. Access to the hardware and the software and the bandwidth, right? I mean, the connections, not easy, but it's not. We've never been closer to having some global solution, because hardware is becoming super inexpensive, right? I mean, if you recall 25 years ago, the $100 laptop project, right, out of MIT Media Lab, it was, a great idea, but actually failed in the sense that the industry actually caught up with that, right? I mean, a very cheap, very inexpensive laptop definitely is around $100, $200. Obviously not one in which you can do video editing and other things, but so what I'm saying is, that which was seen as a desirable outcome for the world in social terms, actually, the technology pretty much is there, and for sure it is there in terms of cost for smartphones. Now that doesn't mean that people have access to them, and that's the challenge. And the other thing, of course, is bandwidth and access. So that's one. But the other is technology can also help in inclusivity. I think we are exploring, for instance, in our case, agricultural sciences and working in the fields with offline asynchronous learning as part of structured learning. What we know about online learning is that even in the best of cases, when learners, students are left alone, very few complete online courses, very few, it takes a lot of commitment. But in universities, we are in a structured setting, right? And so how would that work? It's kind of what we're doing now, in the sense that all courses became online, right? But because they have to finish the courses, now they are, of course, doing their work and creating the discipline that the previous speaker actually was mentioning. And so, building the asynchronous part of that, the offline part of that, could help. And there are technological tools that allow that. In our case, we're exploring technological mobile handheld-based platforms, because you won't take a laptop into a plantation or into the field. You will take a small phone that has a course content that has that again supporting the practice, right? A professor of tropical forestry, for instance, was asking, as part of the platform, students to take pictures of different types of trees, but also different types of diseases, and all that became part of the common discussion within that particular course. And it was interactive. I mean, students recognizing things and learning about things that they had either heard of or read about. And so that offline, I think, enhances inclusivity in the sense that taking it to the broader audiences, you can download, even if you don't have access in your home, but you can have hotspots, let's say in a town or in a neighborhood, maybe squares, public squares could have connectivity, and then you go download the part of the next stage of your virtual learning. And again, some synchronous learning, I think, might be needed, but expands the possibilities, is what I'm saying. And I think it's not all of it, but I think can also contribute to deal with the challenge of inclusivity, which I agree is a global issue. It's not only in medium or low-income countries. We've seen it in the US, in this, when you look at K-12 education in this, but even in university. I'm not based in the US, but of course, I'm connected, I follow. But they're having an issue, with university students going back home and not having at home the connectivity they had on campus. And so it's not only the professor, but even the bandwidth. And so it's a global challenge, and we should think globally. And it's clearly a great social investment. So let me address the final thing, which is, are there possibilities to work with African institutions? First of all, let me say that I believe, I'm a Latin American, but I believe that the missing link in this world of ours, in terms of regions connecting, is Africa, Latin America. Let me just start by saying that us in Latin America are connected to the rest of the world in different ways, and the same is true with Africa, except between each other. And I think there is much more to be done. I think we share many challenges, but we also have distinctive advantages or capabilities. In terms of sustainable energy, resilience is a global power, and many things can be shared in terms of the management of some diseases. Africa is actually has more experience than anyone in the world, and so there are many things to share, and there are many things we share that makes that south-south connection, if you want to call it that, super important. So I think there is a need, there's an opportunity for sure. And in this topic, more so, because now we can have, going beyond the videos, right? Not only can we find the best lecturer on something who could be anywhere in the world, it's more than that. We can actually, and we're right now part of two projects that I want to share, and I'll stop there. One is at university level, right? I mean, and in our case, and in our field, is mapping the knowledge that that's there, and the skills that need to be learned, let's say in agricultural sciences, and starting to virtualize some of that. And I don't say courses, because every university designs its own courses depending on the programs they put together, right? So more than creating, I think that more than creating online courses that can be shared, which is a possibility as well, is actually creating modules that can be put into and built into offerings at every university. And that we can do together for sure. And by we, I mean different universities from around the world, Latin America, the US as Africa, and Africa, Europe, Asia, etc. And so that's the first project. And that's a concrete project where it's a proposal at this point, but it has attracted a lot of interest. There is a second one that we're thinking more Central and South America, and that is not to university level instruction, but excuse me for that. And there, I think there's a huge potential for universities like all of us who are seated here to create a platform of knowledge that would be support for many instructors and teachers in secondary institutions across the world, who would be great tutors for their students, but who would have access to online resources that would be content of their training of their students. And they could have, literally the best knowledge, the latest science, the latest research, everything. But they are needed. They need, teenagers across rural areas in the world, in our case, need the tutors, but we can provide the content. Again, by we, I mean a coalition of many of us. The final thing I'll say is this. We launched something in September of last year, something called the University Global Coalition. I would invite you to look at it. I'll post the website in the chat in a second. But the point is, one of the first thing, we started last year, and then the pandemic came. The goal of this is coalescing, convening universities from across the world to work for development, in particular to work towards the Sustainable Development Goals, on our way to 2030, the decade of action, as it has been declared. Now, this year, the first thing we decided, obviously, was to work on joint online global offerings. We're in this context. Well, we should start. We are working on SDG 2, Zero Hunger, obviously. UC Davis is a co-leader on this work, the Earth University and UC Davis, and there is so much we can do together jointly, and that's a new opportunity for our students, right? I mean, being part of global efforts that 10 years ago would have been either super expensive or impossible. Now it's there. We're already talking. So I'll stop there, but I think there is a lot of opportunity for that joint work. And thank you so much.
There is indeed. Thank you so much, Professor Arturo, for speaking to us about your experience, your very interesting experience. Thank you again for highlighting that face-to-face is an important component of learning, like Dr. Frank highlighted as well. But some of the practical learning components can be mimicked through some types of proxies, with some types of tools like simulators that we see, or remote labs that are being created more and more. I am personally, and as you said, very optimistic and looking forward to the breakthroughs that are going to completely allow us to maybe digitize experiences that for now are only possible face-to-face or physically. I think it is a great idea suggesting to map the knowledge, like create some type of metadata that can be used and developed by each institutions according to their needs and according to their context. So I'm looking forward to seeing this happen on the field. Again, Professor Arturo, thank you so much for your intervention. Without further ado, we'll move to our third panelist, who's Dr. Thandi Mwembe. She is Deputy Vice Chancellor of the Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. Dr. Mwembe is the Vice Chancellor of Research, Innovation, and Internationalization. I'm gonna get there, at Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. Prior to joining the university, she was the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research, Innovation, and Engagement at Tshwane University of Technology, and she was also Director of Research at the University of Western Cape. Before joining UWC, she was the Executive Director of the South African Research Chairs and Centers of Excellence at the National Research Foundation. She has a PhD in medical cell and development biology from the University of Cape Town, a management development program certificate from the University of Stellenbosch Business School, and a postgraduate qualification in tertiary education management from the University of Melbourne, Australia. Doctor, it is again an honor to have you on this panel and to be interacting with you. I'll kindly ask you to take our 15 minutes time slot to talk to us about how universities in South Africa are dealing with the issue of integrating online teaching and learning in at university level and their teachings. How has Nelson Mandela University dealt with the inclusivity again, development of online content, and retooling its students and staff members. There was a speech in the other session about quality assessment and the issues of quality, about assessment, and quality assurance. So we would love to hear your intake on these matters. And I would also love to hear about how staff and students handled the issue of research amidst COVID-19 pandemic. Madam Webe, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Sarah. And thanks for the great facilitation. Greetings to everybody, particularly to Adipala from South Africa. We say hello to our colleagues elsewhere. I'm just going to touch briefly on our experiences as Nelson Mandela University. I think most of the experiences have been shared already, and we share very similar experiences. I'm just going to highlight about our university. I'm sorry I'm not able to share my video because of stability of the connectivity where I am, but I'm glad that you can see the slides. I hope you do. So our university, Nelson Mandela University, we offer a diverse range of courses grouped into 7 academic faculties with very nuanced pedagogical approaches. And our students are drawn from all parts of the country, with a majority coming from where we are in the region of the Eastern Cape of South Africa. And approximately 10% of our students are, in fact, 12% are international students, the majority coming from sub-Saharan African countries. Many of our students from South Africa live in townships, informal settlements, and rural areas where they do not have online access or a private space to study. So the one-size-fits-all approach, such as just adopting an online learning to complete the academic year, would exclude many of our students. And given our strong commitment as a university to social justice and equality, so the one mode of learning is definitely not acceptable and not an acceptable option for us. Hence, we developed 2 learning pathways, which I'm trying to show now. 2 learning and teaching blended pathways and a variation of these to enable students to complete when we started the first semester modules and the academic year. So the pathways range from digital to intensive learning and teaching, of course, when classes resume, to combinations of the 2, as you see on the screen now. So navigating these is a collective effort, and there's an ongoing effort from the university to take care for and support staff and students. There's been a lot of emerging issues as we implement these, such as healthcare, mental health care of students and staff, which we have learned during how to deal with during the process. So pathway 1 will requires that students who can learn online do so until students can return to campus for laboratory work, for experiential learning, clinical training, work integrated learning, school-based learning, and augmenting tutoring. I'd say about 80% of our students are on this pathway 1, and about 20% are on pathway 2. And we are acutely aware that pathway 2 students will have a slower start. Well, they did have a slower start resuming their learning, as they did not have a device or connectivity at the time. And lecturers have assessed what materials these students at home would need, and the packs were delivered actually to the students. We were fortunate that government also provided support in terms of financial assistance to universities so that we can purchase laptops, and these laptops were delivered to the students at home. Same way that the government has assisted, and universities across South Africa have assisted in terms of connectivity data to students. So to guide learning and teaching facilitation on the alternative pathway and assessment redesign. So our university through, I guess through Senate, approved a set of principles. So the fundamental to these principles was the need to care for our students during these times and to adopt a flexible approach, keeping learning management system activities simple and data light, and to adopt a blended assessment approach within a largely continuous assessment framework. So we developed scenarios to adapt the academic calendar, and these scenarios were approved by the university. And the pathways apply equally to undergrad, postgrad, and international students. In fact, what is very interesting, there was a national survey that was done for all universities, and we just gathered this information actually today, just picking on Nelson Mandela University on the experiences of students. From our university, sample size was about 1,495 students. And don't worry about the business of the slide, but what it's showing is that students do acknowledge the benefits of learning with technology. For example, you see quotes like they can access material and allow virtual communication, so distance is not a barrier. And of course, the challenges of learning with technology, there's a quote there saying, my cell phone's functionality prevented me from accessing the learning material, and connectivity was a very big issue when I had a deadline to submit an online test or assignment. So there are challenges, but I guess largely there are opportunities that have emerged from this. And if we look at the frequency of words used to describe these challenges, it's all about network, connectivity, data, a device, and it just shows how the students have experienced. But what is very encouraging is that they believe that it's providing benefits for them. For example, the quote on the left-hand side, improves my knowledge on using devices like a laptop. I've learned how to get used to typing, which helps me to spend adequate time on my test and finish on time, and so on. And what we hear also within the university, we do continuous assessment and evaluation, and we gather these feelings from the students and how they're feeling as we go along. What do they say are the gains or the losses? Self-learning and developing coping mechanisms that they develop, the student-lecturer relationship building. It's interesting because we also offer some training to staff, and they stress the importance of lecturers connecting with students. Some aspects of online learning worked well for students. For example, the pre-recorded lectures, so that students can look at these at their own time. Live interactive lectures on Microsoft Teams. So there's a couple of variations, and how it lands on students is different for different groupings of students. In terms of research response, of course, universities have got these task teams that are looking at different aspects of the response to the pandemic. One that I want to highlight within the university, we've got a COVID-19 coordinating committee, which is, we call it CCC. And this is more on transformation and engagement. It's very much postured to partner with society, looking at societal challenges. And it's a mechanism for the university to partner with the society in co-creating the solutions for society, but also in learning on how to deal with the pandemic in various ways. And one thing that has emerged from this coordinating committee are the types of research activities that I would say are kind of different from the norm. We've got a theme on food systems that is developed from this, but food systems in a way that deals with the societies, for example, a project with the gardeners in communities. So it's very community-based. Internally, we've managed to source out or to get some funding as a transdisciplinary research grants for people to conduct research as a way of rapid response to the pandemic. And like all the universities within South Africa, we offer assistance and partner with government in terms of research areas ranging from drug development, PPE, and so on, and sanitizers, and we develop our own sanitizers within the university. But to be able to help students, you would imagine that at postgraduate level, research has been delayed because of the pandemic, because they cannot access the laboratories, for example. They cannot continue with interviews. So we have now provided scholarships for extended support, so that we've made an assessment to see how we can help students to complete the academic year, because they will need some extension in terms of student scholarships, and that we are offering to the students up to a year, depending on the circumstances. And in terms of internationalization, this has been mentioned already, Sarah, that internationalization is reimagined, and we're using these networks now to offer our students opportunities. In fact, at some instances, it's sometimes opportunities that we would not have imagined in the past. Have we not have been forced to work digitally this way? So in summary, what I would like to say is that like everywhere else, we have seen that the pandemic has really shaped and has really emphasized collaboration. It has emphasized empathy and also to just take care of each other as staff, and as in the relationship between staff and students to be nurtured. And I will stop there without having to repeat what everybody else has said so far. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mwebe. Thank you for sharing the stats and the data that you've collected during this pandemic and before. It was most useful. And thank you so much for being so brief. We've not even reached 10 minutes of your speech. So for the few minutes that are left to us, I would like to ask you, you've spoken to us about what you within Nelson Mandela University have learned from the pandemic. What are future projects that you are that are going to take place in the university?
Oh, you mean the future research projects?
For future projects, not particularly with regards to research, but to tackle the problems of digitization, for instance, that COVID has, in a way, shown more and more.
Oh, yes. One thing that we have learned, for example, just as a university, the business model of the university is to reimagine how we use our space. So the repurposing of our buildings is the key. But also, I think it has forced us to look at ways of partnering with society in a manner that's impactful. So it's a university that purports for social justice and equality, and as our namesake, Mandela. And the other thing that we like to accelerate is our African footprint. We are embarking on a big project of tracing Nelson Mandela's footsteps in Africa. And we're going to do this it's an internationalization approach, but it's very focused on matters that Nelson Mandela were at the heart of Nelson Mandela, for example, such as public health is one of them. science and technology being another, and governance issues and so on. So this has provided such opportunities that we would like to see our university respond to the pandemic even in more accelerated ways than we would have otherwise tackled this. In terms of research, we are situated we are in a geographically advantaged spot of oceans, and we're accelerating our oceans and cultures research, and this requires partnerships across the continent, and we're working hard on getting those transdisciplinary approaches take off. So transdisciplinarity is one major approach, and it has been shown also from the transdisciplinary research grants that we've offered at the university, how the people have responded within the university to respond to the pandemic, and a systems analysis approach is emerging. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much for kindly sharing your projects. Without further ado, we'll move to our fourth and last speaker of today, Professor Theresa Akanji. Good evening, Professor. You are Vice Chancellor of the University of Bamenda in Cameroon and Deputy Board Chair of RUFORA. You are also a board member of the AAU, a fellow of New York Academy of Science, and a fellow of the Cameroon Academy of Sciences. Previously, you've served as a deputy vice chancellor in charge of internal control and evaluation at the University of Buea in Cameroon. You are what you describe yourself as a product of Our Lady of the Lourdes College, Mancun Bamenda, St. Mary of Woods College, Indiana, the State University of New York, and the School of Tropical Medicine, Louisiana State University, all based in the USA. And you received a PhD in parasitology and immunology. It is a great pleasure to have you. Thank you for being so patient with us, Professor. And I'll kindly ask you to speak to us about what your opinion is on the digital technology landscape in Africa, of course, at university level with regards to educational systems, and what have the universities in Cameroon as a whole done to address the digital divide? And perhaps you could speak to us about the experience at Bamenda University. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Can I share my screen? Begin by sharing. I don't know if Francis can help me.
You can absolutely share your screen.
Francis, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, let me see if I can share.
Meanwhile, let me just tell you that we are perfectly on time and we'll have a great Q&A session afterwards. So if you have any questions or comments, do not hesitate to leave them in the group chat. We'll tackle them after our speaker's intervention.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. And I greet all the distinguished members of the panel. I've really enjoyed hearing you share your experiences. And I also thank the participants who have stayed on up until now. In a special way, I thank Professor Adipala for giving me this honor to be a member of the panel. Our discussions will continue, and I'm going to speak on the digital landscape in Africa and the efforts of universities in Cameroon to bridge the digital divide. Next slide, please. Okay, and I'm going to give an overview of Africa's digital footprint. I think we've already heard a lot about that. Then a brief presentation on what Cameroon universities are doing to bridge the digital divide, and of course, a a few of the challenges that we all are facing in the continent, in the African continent. Next slide, please. We realized that the development and use of digital technology in Africa are on an upward trend. Policies that have been put in place, such as the Agenda 2063 and the European Union, African Union Digital Economy Task Force framework, have all supported this growth of digital technology on the continent. As I speak, we have over 442 tech hubs that have been developed, particularly in South Africa, Ghana, Kenya, Egypt, Nigeria, and Morocco. And in Nigeria and Ghana, we have digital technologies that have impacted the agricultural sector positively. So the digital footprints of Africa covers areas that include internet connectivity, indigenous software development enterprises, adequate IT manpower, and network architecture. We've all presented and agreed that digital technologies are making advances into e-learning, on the continent. Universities now have online content that can be shared across borders. So interconnectivity in African universities is no longer something that is local. We are putting up a global image as far as possibilities of interconnectivity. Internet service providers in Africa, however, depend on foreign-based mega technology companies. And you will agree with me that the hosting rights and licenses held by these foreign companies are expensive. So this impacts kind of negatively on the consumer who has to pay highly for internet use. When it comes to the Cameroon perspective on how we are coping with digital divide, I would like to present the state universities in Cameroon briefly. There are 8 state universities in Cameroon, which are distributed across the 10 regions of the country. And all these state universities are under the accreditation authority of the Ministry of Higher Education. We have a lot of private higher education institutions, but all of these have to be mentored by the 8 state universities. The National Higher Education Policy of 2012 is a flagship program of the Ministry of Higher Education in Cameroon, which has as objective to increase the training of manpower and use of digital technology in the universities. This program has at its core the University Digital Development Centers, which we call UDDC. And these centers have been planted in all the 8 state universities to allow for universities to share resources through an online digital link. Next slide. Next slide, please. So here is a map showing the distribution of the different universities in Cameroon, and we're spread throughout the 10 regions, as I said. My university is right here, where I have the arrow. That's the University of Bamenda. And the University of Bamenda is one of 2 Anglo-Saxon universities in Cameroon. The other one is the University of Boya, which is older than the University of Bamenda. University of Bamenda will be 10 years in December, and it's the youngest of all the state universities, and the mother university, the oldest, which for several years was the lone university in Cameroon, is the University of Yaoundé. I just wanted to show you this map so that you would appreciate the university digital development centers that will give an opportunity for us to share resources across the country. So what has been done to students to have access to digital technology? About 4 years ago, the head of state began distributing laptops to every student, university student in Cameroon, be it from the state university or from the private higher education institutions. And 500,000 laptops are being distributed. These laptops, what is good about them is that the students are able to amend as desired to improve its capacity and performance. So at least part of that digital divide, the gap has been breached by providing all university students with laptops, even though you could have the laptop and still have problems with connectivity, and you can still have problems with power shortages, all of these things we experience here in Cameroon. Next slide. The University Digital Development Center, as I said, of each university shall be linked to all other universities. In September of this year, September 2020, the Minister of Higher Education signed a contract with the National Telecommunication Corporation, taking the bandwidth of universities to 40 megabytes per second. And next slide. Next slide. All the universities have to take charge of being connected to the optic fiber network. This is University of Bamenda optic fiber network as at the end of 2019, but as I speak, the end of 2020, most of our buildings are now connected. Next slide. The University of Bamenda, like some of the other universities and private higher education institutions, use the learning management system. Our university, the University of Bamenda, launched the LMS platform on March 3rd, 2020. That was before the COVID-19 lockdown. And I want to say here that my showing the University of Bamenda on the map and saying it is the youngest university, I also say that it is the university that has the most remote location. And the last 4.5 years has not been easy years for us in the Anglophone regions of Cameroon, because we have the Anglophone crisis. There's a socio-political crisis ongoing. And there were many times that our staff and students could not come to the university campus. Yet our students, in spite of many of them being kidnapped and asked for huge sums of money to pay for their release, and a few killings, that's how bad it was, our students were still resilient and wanting their education. So we had to, through the approval of the University Council, adopt teaching the students through WhatsApp, email, and chats. And so before the COVID-19 lockdown, the University of Bamenda was experiencing many other lockdowns due to the socio-political crisis. And so since 2018, we at least started digital delivery of lectures. And when we could meet face-to-face, we took care of the practical session, laboratory sessions, and tutorials. So the COVID-19 came just to strengthen our LMS platform. So that is the advantage of COVID-19 lockdown. Next slide. This is the front view of the University Digital Development Center of the University of Bamenda. And as I stated earlier, all the 8 state universities have the same state-of-the-art building and a central hub that coordinates that. Next slide, please. Okay, so the University Digital Development Center has as its key objective to develop digital pedagogic material. And each center is going to be equipped with recording facilities, digital display boards, and other resources to facilitate development of digital content, and of course the digital library, which is a key facet of the center, with access to shared ebooks and documents amongst all the universities in Cameroon. Next slide, please. And so the challenges are there, as I said at the beginning, a lot of power outages.
I think we might have lost you, Professor. Or is it just me?
Universities now will at least enjoy some internet bandwidth speed. The challenges, right from the beginning of the session, Professor Peterson dealt quite a bit on some of the challenges. And so what I'll just add here is there's a need to have homegrown corporations in the sector of software and hardware development, cybersecurity, cloud computing, and 3D printing technology need manpower development plans to address the present and future demands. And as our last speaker, Dr. Thandi said, you know, there's no need for us to keep duplicating. We must put all our efforts together in the continent so there's synergy. And that said, I come to the end of my presentation, and I thank you so much for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Theresa, for sharing your thoughts and experience. I'm terribly sorry about the hardship the country is going through, and I salute your students for their bravery. And of course, this highlights and underlines the importance of the inclusivity mechanisms that we spoke about before, about building support systems that are going to help professors and students keep up the great work that has been done so far. Thank you also for sharing the UDDC's initiatives that have taken place to support retooling students. And most importantly, encouraging, as you said, as most of the panelists said, mutualizing the efforts. There has been a discussion on the chat about how we may not have to reinvent the wheel. Mutualizing the efforts that are done at different institutions levels can be key to us. Speeding the digitization process and helping fight this pandemic and keeping up the great initiatives that have taken place, crossing fingers, post-pandemics. So you're our last speaker for today. I think we are going to move to to receiving a few questions. I think we're good with time. We have about 35 minutes left on our clock. So if there are any any members of the audience that would like to ask us questions or share their experience or comment what has been said, feel free to raise your hands, and our great support system, Francis or David and other little helpers behind the scenes will give you the possibility to speak. There is a hand raised. Isaac.
No.
No, I'm just applauding the presenters.
Oh, okay, sorry. Thank you so much.
Okay, Sam is up.
I think we have a question from Awadallah.
Thank
Professor,
you very much for this good presentation that we have heard from our colleagues at the different university and from outside our continent. And yes, I have some comments about the presentations and about the picture of adoption of this e-learning. And it seems that most of this presentation came out from leading universities in Africa, for example, and all well-established, they have well-established education system from Makerere or in Uganda and from South Africa and from Cameroon. But if we look at the landscape of our education in Africa, we have so many universities that they are lacking very simple infrastructure that are required for e-learning. For example, I wrote here in the chat that what we have limitations of financial support, for example, for these universities which are not presented here, for example, their experience about e-learning. Even, for example, in Sudan, as Khartoum University, which is also a very old university, but still, and they have well-educated and human resources and well-trained. But the infrastructure is still, because we have problems of students. Our students are coming from rural areas, very remote rural areas, and there is no cover of electricity and internet and so on. So we need collaboration from, for example, our other university, for example, from Europe or from USA, that and ask for the either in funding or training or something like this. So just I mean that the picture we have seen here is not or is not reflecting the situations of adoption of this e-learning in other universities, which are still lacking behind, and still they have they lack very simple infrastructures that is required for e-learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for sharing your comment. Is there anybody who would like to answer the comments? Maybe Francis, I see you're unmuted.
Yes, thank you very much, Sarah. And I think our colleague is absolutely correct. And that what I was trying to say also in my presentation, that you have got an unequal landscape on the African continent. But for me, what is important is probably 2 or 3 issues. The one is that we will never only have online learning, or we will have a blended approach. And that in the blended approach, I think we should try to see how we can capitalize the blended approach initially in such a way that provide you that comparative advantage. So if your comparative advantage is your your institution and your lecture theatres, then I think in terms of presenting it, it must be a combination. I think I like the slide that Professor Tande Gwepe has put forward in terms of the different pathways. So that is the one point I would like to make. The second one is what I've actually put a challenge forward for our governments, for our philanthropic organizations that sits not only on the African continent, but I think most of them sits outside of the continent, for telecommunication companies that are multinationals that sit in other parts of the continent, but also in other parts of the globe, is for that discussion to happen, so that there's a useful outcome that we should move towards, and somebody need to initiate that. It often would come maybe through entities or platforms like Roof Forum, the Association for African Universities, but even in your own governments, that discussion should happen, and that we should use the agencies such as the AU, such as the African Development Bank, and others. But if that discussion is not happening, then and there isn't a, we're going to have these sort of webinars and discussions for the next year or so. We need to say what is the action that flow out of that, and that is at least a proposal that I'm making. And the third one is to say, well, how can we reimagine our international partnerships to the advantage for both parties? And I've, in my engagements, universities in the UK, and in Europe, and in the North, I've been saying that a large percentage of your financial model of those universities are based on international students. If that scenario changes, it is in your benefit as well to look at a different internationalization model. But if we craft that together and we put forward our value proposition as institutions in Africa, and I'm not talking about only the advantaged institutions, I'm talking about the whole distribution of institutions, then I think we can reshape a different strategy on the back of internationalization that could assist us. And for me, maybe what we should try to have as a follow-up discussion is, how do we convert these into practical plans that we could support through different role players? Because we know what to do. We know what to do. We can say this is what needs to happen. But the question is, why is it not happening? And I think the inertia is that there aren't platforms that take that on as a particular project or as a particular challenge. And I think, and my last comment on that, Sarah, would be, if I engage with philanthropic organizations across the world, they said this is the social solidarity that has come out of COVID, but their focus and the trustees or the people that support them, their funders, their donors, are saying, well, what is the impact? And how can we measure that impact? And that is how we convert these plans into impactful outcomes. And that's not going to happen if we just talk through it. And I think we need to, I want like us to work to that level where there's a delivery, and we say that if we only pick one or two projects and we say, but we're going to do that as a collective, not only as institutions in the South or advantaged institutions of the continent, but as a collective. So I totally share the comments, but I think we need to move to the action part, and the action part is more than just institutions talking to themselves. It is also to say, well, how do we bring the others and utilize the configuration of other entities on the continent to help us getting there? Thank you.
What's wisely spoken, Professor. Thank you for also sharing hands-on measures to take. I don't know how we are with time. Francis is prompting me to conclude in a few. Maybe we can take one or two last questions. I see I see two hands that were raised. We have our panelist, Tony Frank, and Professor George Openjuru.
Yes.
Professor George, and then we'll move to Professor Frank. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. I would like to first start by appreciating all the presenters from the first session and these sessions. In all the presentation, what I can see is that the problems are similar as already indicated, and the challenges are the same. Uh, and we have all been stampeded, as it were, by COVID-19 to begin talking online learning, like it's something new. But if I can go back to the first one, you realize that in Makerere University, where I was before moving to Guru, we started fiddling with the ODEL from way back in 1991, and 20 years down the road, this has not picked up. We are happy that the COVID-19 experience is forcing people in that direction. The point I would really like to bring is, listening to all the presentation, you will see that the major problem is resource constraint, the devices, the internet infrastructure and connectivity, the bandwidth, and everything. And that sets me into thinking that I think that we are not thinking of the trade-offs that come with these transitions, because we are transitioning from a face-to-face conventional model, which require a completely different set of infrastructure, like the big classrooms, the brick and mortar delivery mechanism, where we have got to build big classrooms. At the moment in my university, I'm building one, which is almost 20 million US, to about 10 million US dollars. And we are not looking at the fact that if we move to online, some of these facilities may not be available, may not be required, because we will be interacting with students in their own locations, taking advantage of their own space for the delivery of our online learning programs. So when you deal the trade-offs, then I think the cost problems should be overcome. Because even if we are now not going to get rid of the infrastructure in the process of transitioning into the online model, there are other costs which come with hosting students in one location, which will immediately go down. In the sense of utilities, I am a vice chancellor, yes. Utilities, water, accommodations, and all these facilities required to keep the students. All these will be released. And I believe if it is well calculated, we should be able to have the resources. For me, I think what we really need, because we are moving into this phase, the stampeding is unfortunate because it's getting some institutions and some countries without the basic policy framework for running ODEL. And I believe a mistake is being made there. We need the policies to govern this kind of learning provision. We need the quality assurance measures for this learning, the accreditation standards, and then the skills which we have been talking about. But once the policy infrastructures are in place, that then should release universities, release university resources to invest, even government, to invest into this new mode of delivery, which for some of us, we have been talking about it for a long time. And if we had done like one of the presenters, I think Fendi, we were doing the blended model, then it would be on a 50-50. So instead of having like 45,000 students in 5 square kilometers, you would just be having fewer. And with fewer students on campus, on the physical campus, comes down the cost, which can then release resources for the other learning provisions, and even to support the students from home. And besides, I still believe that the online learning facilitation will also mean one lecturer or many lecturers taking care of a bigger number, not this ratio of 1:50, which is for the traditional face-to-face. So I think not all is lost, but I think we should just manage the transition well. And once we are across, it should be all possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor George, for sharing these possible actions. I think we're a bit reaching the end of our webinar. We still want to give a little bit of time for our panelists to conclude. And maybe Frank, you still had a comment. So if we can conclude that too in our Professor Frank, if we can include that in the closing statement, and we'll then give Professor Adipala a chance to conclude our webinar. Maybe we can start our concluding statements with Professor Peterson.
Professor Kay's hand was up. Could you give her a chance, please?
Of course. I thought, yes. Sorry, Professor Kay.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I just wanted to reinforce what Professor Peterson was saying, because I think that this is an incredibly opportune time for us to make real strong efforts, coordinating and collaborating and actually appealing. We have a very strong business case. Africa has the youth dividend. Africa has all this new market that's going to be available, and we're actually in quite a good bargaining position, but we need to do it together to work with some of these very large telecom and internet device companies, but also our own universities. They've always been very restrictive and bureaucratic about changes, and they've themselves woken up to the need to make the change. And if we don't strike now and really take this forward, then I think we will lose a great opportunity. And so I think that we should really make an effort to take up the suggestion from Professor Peterson, and then work with the many different partners, some of whom you have spoken today and talked about what it has been possible and how they have done it. We've all struggled, even the most advantaged of countries. So there are different ways in which we're able to do it, but we need to make those moves now. And I think there are the opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Professor Kay. Under your agreement, Francis, if we have no more questions, should we move to the conclusions from our panelists?
Yes, sure, we can move on.
Awesome. Professor Peterson, as our lead panelist, could you please give us a 2 minutes conclusion?
All right. But thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you for moderating it so elegantly. I think the 2 or 3 points I would like to make is again, I just wanted to emphasize what Kay have said. We need to move to action, and I think we do have a value proposition to make. It's for us to find the right place to do that as a collective, and that would be my call. And I certainly would do my utmost best to see whether we can promote that. The second one is, as the focus has been a lot of teaching and learning, we must never forget that platforms such as this is to share. But I think I often think that collaboration, what COVID-19 have given us, is not only collaboration, but to take collaboration a step higher and to take it to co-creation. Because remember, contexts differ, and it's important for us to share our learnings, but to also learn from the contexts where we are situated, whether it's on the African continent or whether it's in South America or in the States or in Europe. So that for me is the second part. How do we meaningfully collaborate and co-create? And the third one, which we haven't talked a lot on, but I think it was inferred in a lot of the presentations, because the focus has been on online teaching and learning mainly, I do think that the other benefits that digital tools can bring for the university, that can make the university business model a business model that are much more in place within the 21st century, we must try to also pursue. And that is online and digital tools in terms of other parts like the applications, registration, mental health, in other parts of the university business model and in internationalization, because there's a lot of value that we can learn. We're talking about repurposing buildings, for instance, as an example. But I think using digital tools can extract a lot of other value for the university. And I would like that discussion to also have, because it's a little bit biased or camouflage if you only talk about online learning, that you don't actually spend some time. But if you really would like to take the university into the 21st century, you have to look at the other integrated parts of the business model. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Peterson. Professor Tony Frank, as I will go by order of presentation, would you like to give us your concluding statements?
Sure, and thanks, Sarah. You did a wonderful job of facilitating this. I was just going to underscore a couple of the points that several of our speakers, including Professor Peterson, have made. We all recognize that there is a bridge needed to be built, if you will, over this digital divide, that in terms of devices, in terms of internet bandwidth connectivity, all of us, regardless of where we are, have work to be done there. And I think we all recognize that, as people have said, that's likely to be done through a partnership. Governments will play a role, philanthropic organizations will play a role, the large corporations and providers, as part of their social contract to do business in our countries, will need to play a role. To me, the point I was going to make was that if we make an argument to these organizations to invest in this infrastructure and then good things will happen, it's a more generic argument. And I think we lose some of the potency of our argument. Conversely, if we propose very specific things, we run the risk of these potential investors saying, well, yes, that's nice, but I wanted something broader. I think when we do the combination, and I think this was one of the points Professor Peterson, maybe it was one of the other panelists made, when we combine those and say, we would like to do these things, they will have these immediate benefits for our students, for our societies, and the infrastructure that makes those possible will remain. And through that infrastructure, then we have the capacity to do these other connections, whether those are in research. I love the co-creation term. I think that's the real power that will allow this new sort of post-COVID-19 pandemic spirit to really come to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Frank. Professor Arturo?
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks for your moderation. So maybe let me emphasize two things. One is double down on collaboration. I think we can do more together in terms of getting the resources, as it has been said, and I won't repeat on that, but also on creating content and exploring even new activities for our students. The other thing I say is also on collaboration is that, this is a great opportunity also for universities around the world to connect our students to the global problems we face. And there is a new, never before seen chance of this global collaboration on digital means to address these things together, with across regions, for instance. And I think, again, from our in Latin American students would gain a lot from working with African students and Asian students and American students and European students on issues that we share as common challenges, including climate change, for instance. And so there is this unique opportunity, and to the point Professor Peterson was making, in other parts of what we do as universities, that we can definitely use this disruption to leapfrog, if you will, or to jump ahead in terms of time of what we would have been doing had it been a linear progression. So I would invite everyone to think about that and maybe join initiatives that are popping up around the world. And thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much, Professor Kondo, for your closing statements. Professor Mwebe. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name right. I'm terribly sorry.
You are, Sarah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Hello, Francis. Thank you very much. I think everything has been said, Sarah, but what I can add is that perhaps we need to take courage and comfort in that universities have experienced these kind of turbulent times before. And I think the one thing that has come out, that has made universities stronger is collaboration and networks. The one thing that we haven't spoken about today is perhaps not in detail, is about the leadership that's needed at universities going forward. And I think it's something that needs to be strengthened further in order to respond appropriately to the change that the pandemic has put on us. The other thing is that the transition to online learning is putting a strain on opportunities of access, but at the same time, it's providing those opportunities for students. The financial impact on universities is high. In our country, for example, in South Africa, the main things that have been worsened is the issues of the economy, reduced allocation in the 2020 budgets from government, and unplanned expenses by universities in response to COVID. So it means we have to think about new ways of sustainability within the universities and new models. So therefore, we need these partnerships more. I can't overemphasize that. And many universities are involved in COVID research, as I indicated earlier, including vaccine development, drug development, epidemiology, and some socioeconomic impact of the disease. And we need to strengthen this going forward within the continent. And I think there are many opportunities through SDG networks and a focus on our local economies and societies in co-creating knowledge. That's just my closing remarks, Sarah. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor. Professor Akanji? You are muted, Professor. Professor Akanji, you're muted.
It has been, thank you, Sarah. It has been most enriching. I've enjoyed the discussions. A lot has been said about the challenges and the digital divide. I just wanted to bring in the issue of mindset. Because I know in my university, it was very challenging to get everybody on board. Because you may have the facilities, but the staff, they don't want to use it. They may not want to use it because they don't want the time to sit and plan the lectures that can be delivered digitally. So that is another problem that we need to actually work on, because the mindset, it's an issue. And then we have to look at the issue of quality assurance with online teaching. I know that so far, we don't yet have a policy on quality assurance yet. So that is another issue, that the two issues that I'll add on to what the other members of the panelists have already stressed on. Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Dipala. Thank you, Forum Secretariat, for hosting us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Akanji. If I can just conclude before moving to our generous host, Professor Adipala. It has been an absolute honor and extremely humbled to have been moderating this panel. I would just like to jump back to a few words that our panelists had in their conclusion remarks. Professor Peterson spoke about co-creation and how it is another step for collaboration, and how this diversity can give us different case studies that we can nurture our students from. And I'm just looking forward to how this can be spanned around and spinned off. You have spoken about creating learning experiences instead of learning, and that is a word that I use very often in my day-to-day. I do not think that I'm creating learning components, but creating learning experience, and that's the kind of image that I'd rather convey with all the supporting systems and the integrated system, as you eloquently described, that we should build. And our panelists have spoken about the different mechanisms that can be put in place. And I'm looking forward to seeing how post-COVID is going to be. It provides a great promise. I'm looking forward to seeing all the projects and the possible fields of action flourish. We're going to be creating awesome communities. We're going to try and keep the momentum that has been built through COVID, encouraging people to take ownership and actually take leadership on the projects that are taking place. And I'm looking forward to see the different projects that are going to take place to improve our processes as a whole. Thank you so much for your time, Professor Adipala. Thank you for being such a generous host, and I'll leave the closing statement to you.
Sarah and all the distinguished panelists for both this session and for the previous session. It's been a great honor hosting you, listening to you, learning from you, and then your final take home, which is really that we must move to action. And I think that's a great call. Also learned about reimagining internationalization of our higher education system. I think these are really great things that we need to push forward. But also, I think the other message I got was really that the digitization should provide also opportunity for new business models for our universities. And really, finally, the fact that we can connect globally in this meeting is really great, that it is providing us with new opportunities. Moving forward, we will produce a synthesis report that we will share with you. Fortunately, on Friday, we have the annual business meeting of Forum, and we are hoping that it will be addressed by Her Excellency, the Commissioner for Human Resource Science and Technology of the African Union. I think for me, Teresa, and this is where we put the message straight away at that level of African Union, a call for action, what we think should be done. Tomorrow also is a special day for us. It will be the Moroccan Day. And I would like to invite those of you who are able to actually attend also our event for tomorrow, the Moroccan Day. I think it will be beautiful. Morocco is a beautiful place with beautiful culture. So it's a great opportunity again to be together. And then finally on Friday again to be together. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much for honoring our invitation, for all those very useful insights, and for the active participation from the participants. Really a lot of comments. Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you all. I wish you all a nice day and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.